and they said it looked like a man, but no man stands that tall in the dark with wings folded behind his back. They said its eyes were red, not shining like reflectors, but glowing, as if the night itself had lit two coals and set them staring. And once people in Point Pleasant, West Virginia started seeing it, the fear never really left. The Mothman does not sound frightening at first. The name almost weakens it. It makes you picture something small, dusty, trapped against a porch light. But the thing witnesses described in 1966 was nothing like that. It was huge. A gray, human-shaped creature with a body like a lean adult man, only taller, around 6 to 7 feet high, towering over most people. Some said its wings stretched wider than a car was long. Others said it didn't even seem to flap when it moved. It just rose, silent and wrong, like it belonged to a different set of rules. The part people never forget is the eyes. Bright red, round, fixed. In some stories, they appeared first, floating in the dark before the body even became clear. And when witnesses saw them, they didn't just feel surprised, they felt hunted. The legend began near an old World War II munitions site outside Point Pleasant, a place locals called the TNT area. It was already the kind of place that unsettled people. Empty buildings, cracked concrete, pools of black water, rusting metal hidden in the trees. Then, in November 1966, two young couples were driving through that area late at night when they saw something standing near one of the abandoned structures. It was shaped like a man, but bigger, with folded wings and glowing red eyes. When they panicked and sped away, they claimed the creature lifted off and followed their car. That detail is what turns a strange sighting into a nightmare. They said it kept up with them. Imagine pressing harder on the gas, looking in the mirror, and still seeing it there, gliding behind you at highway speed, close enough that the red eyes never disappear. By the time they reached town, they were terrified, and their story spread fast. Then more stories came. A woman named Linda Scarberry, one of the first witnesses, insisted what she saw was real. Other locals reported seeing the same figure near roads, fields, and rooftops. Some described hearing odd sounds. Some said their pets went missing or acted strangely. One family claimed a red-eyed creature peered at them from outside. Another person said it rose straight up into the air without effort, like gravity had simply stopped applying to it. And this is where Mothman stops being just a monster story, because the legend is tied to something real. On December 15, 1967, a little over a year after the first sightings, the Silver Bridge collapsed during rush hour, killing 46 people. The disaster shattered Point Pleasant, and afterward, many people began to connect the creature to the tragedy. They wondered if Mothman had been a warning, or worse, an omen. Not something that caused disaster, but something that appeared before it, like a shadow cast ahead of catastrophe. That idea is what gave the legend its lasting power. A giant flying creature is frightening, but a creature that appears before terrible things happen is something else entirely. You cannot fight it, you cannot hide from it, and even if you see it, maybe that doesn't mean you are being hunted. Maybe it means something worse is already coming. Over time, skeptics suggested the sightings could have been a large bird, maybe a sandhill crane, confused in the dark and magnified by panic. But that explanation never fully killed the story, because cranes do not feel like prophecy. Cranes do not become part of a town's grief. Cranes do not linger in memory like a warning nobody understood until it was too late. That is why Mothman still survives. Not because people love monsters, but because some legends attach themselves to fear that already exists. Fear of the dark road, fear of the thing outside the headlights, fear that sometimes disaster arrives with a witness. And if you ever find yourself alone at night, somewhere empty, somewhere industrial, somewhere the world feels abandoned, and you look up and see two red lights hanging in the dark, don't call it a moth. Because if Mothman is real, the worst part is not seeing it. The worst part is wondering what comes next. But if Mothman is terrifying because it feels like a warning, the next legend is worse for a different reason. Because this time, the fear is not of something watching from the dark, but of something that can wear a different face. And once a story stops being about an omen and starts becoming about imitation, deception, and things that should not be able to become human at all, you are no longer talking about Mothman.
If something in the desert is watching you, you pray it's an animal. Because if it stands like a man, moves like a wolf, and smiles like it understands you, then you may have wandered too close to something people were never meant to name out loud. The Skinwalker is not just a monster, it is a warning. In many retellings, people imagine the Skinwalker as a beast caught halfway between forms, a tall, thin figure moving on two legs, but with the speed and posture of a predator. Sometimes it looks almost human from a distance, then wrong in all the ways that matter up close. Arms too long, joints bending at odd angles, eyes reflecting light like an animal's, skin hanging loose as if it doesn't fit the body beneath it. In other stories, it appears as a coyote, a wolf, a deer, or something close to those animals but never fully convincing, too large, too thin, too aware. Witnesses often describe a shape about the size of a full-grown man or bigger, 6 feet tall or more when upright. In animal form, it is said to look like a wolf larger than any normal wolf, sometimes as heavy-looking as a bear, but moving with eerie silence. That mismatch is what makes it unforgettable. Your mind recognizes something familiar, then instantly knows it is not. The legend comes from Navajo tradition, where the Skinwalker is tied to a far darker meaning than a simple creature feature. It is often described as a witch who has gained power through forbidden acts and can take the shape of animals. In Navajo belief, this is not campfire entertainment. It is deeply feared, deeply serious, and not spoken about lightly. The Skinwalker is not just dangerous because of how it looks, it is dangerous because it represents someone who crossed every spiritual boundary for power. That is why the stories feel so different from ordinary monster tales. The fear is not just physical, it is moral. Something human chose to become this. One of the most chilling kinds of Skinwalker stories begins with a sound. Someone hears knocking at a window late at night or footsteps circling a house. Then a voice comes from outside, soft, familiar, maybe even sounding like a relative, calling them by name. That is the detail that stays with people. Not the claws, not the eyes, the voice. The idea that something outside can imitate the person you trust most and do it almost perfectly, except for one small mistake. Too slow, too empty, too practiced. There are stories from lonely roads in the Southwest where drivers swear they saw a large animal pacing their truck at impossible speed, keeping up without effort. At first, it looked like a coyote. Then it rose higher, almost like it could stand. Then it turned its head and looked directly through the window, not like an animal startled by headlights, but like something measuring the person inside. And then there are the stories tied to remote ranches and open desert, where people report livestock acting terrified for no visible reason, shapes moving along fence lines at dusk, or a figure seen far off in the brush that vanishes the moment someone tries to focus on it. That uncertainty becomes part of the fear. You never get the full picture, just enough to know something was there. What keeps the Skinwalker alive in people's minds is not just its shape-shifting, it is what it does to the imagination. A ghost is one thing, a beast is another, But the Skinwalker sits in the space between human and animal, between folklore and trespass, between something supernatural and something that may already be standing just beyond the porch light. It turns the familiar into a threat, a dog barking in the dark, a figure crossing a field, a voice outside the house. Things that should be harmless suddenly feel loaded with danger. And maybe that is why the legend has lasted so long, because deep down, one of the oldest human fears is not the unknown. It is the almost known, the thing that looks close enough to fool you, the thing that knows how to be invited in. So if you ever hear something calling your name from outside, late at night, in a voice that sounds nearly right, make sure it's human before you answer. Because the most terrifying thing about a skinwalker is not what it becomes, it's what it was before. And if the skinwalker is terrifying because it can wear a shape that is almost human, then the Wendigo is worse for an even darker reason. Because it is not just a creature you encounter in the wild, it is what happens when something human becomes hollow enough to turn into hunger. Not imitation, not disguise, transformation. And once a legend stops being about what is stalking you from the dark and becomes about what a person can become when fear, cold, and desperation strip everything else away, you are no longer talking about the skinwalker. You are talking about the Wendigo.
If you saw a figure in the snow, taller than any man, thin as a dead tree, and moving like it hadn't felt cold in centuries, you wouldn't call it human. You would call it the moment the forest stopped feeling empty. And in the oldest winter stories, that moment has a name: the Wendigo. The Wendigo comes from Algonquian folklore, born from the kind of winter that can turn hunger into madness. It is not just a creature in the woods. It is what happens when a person gives in to appetite, greed, and desperation until there is almost nothing human left. That is what makes it so disturbing. The Wendigo is not some ancient beast from another world. It begins as us. Descriptions change from story to story, but the image is always unforgettable. Witnesses and legends describe it as towering, often 7 to 15 feet tall, depending on the telling, making even a large man look small beside it. Imagine a full-grown adult standing next to a basketball hoop, and then imagine something even taller, bent slightly at the shoulders, as if it has spent too long stalking through the trees. Its body is impossibly thin, like a starving man stretched over a giant frame. Ribs show through its skin. Its arms hang too long, almost reaching its knees. Its fingers look more like hooks than hands. In many versions, its face is gaunt and skull-like, with deep-set eyes and a mouth pulled wide in a way that never looks natural. Some modern retellings give it antlers or a deer-like skull, but older traditions often describe something worse, a thing that still looks enough like a person to make you hesitate. Not an animal, not a ghost. Something that resembles a human being after hunger has hollowed it out and left only the urge to consume. And no matter how much it feeds, it only grows hungrier. That is the heart of the legend. In many tellings, the Wendigo is created when someone commits an unspeakable act to survive a brutal winter. In others, it is born from greed itself, the desire to take more and more even when others are suffering. The lesson was clear in the communities that told these stories. There are some choices that do not end when the storm does. Some hungers do not leave once they enter you. That warning became more terrifying because of the stories people swore were real. One of the most repeated tales tells of hunters in the northern woods finding tracks in fresh snow that looked human but far too large. Each stride was too long, as if whatever made them had legs longer than any person should have. The trail would circle campsites, pause near cabins, then disappear into the trees without sound. Men who followed those tracks sometimes came back shaken, claiming they heard breathing nearby long before they saw anything at all. Another story tells of travelers hearing voices at night in the forest, someone crying for help, someone calling from just beyond the firelight. The voice sounded close, then distant, then close again, as if it were moving without touching the snow. People said the Wendigo could mimic sound to draw you deeper into the dark. That is what makes the legend so effective. It does not simply chase you. It lures you. It lets fear do part of the work. Then there are the stories of sightings. A tall figure glimpsed between pine trees, pale against the black woods, standing still until it suddenly isn't. People described seeing something broader than a wolf, taller than a man, but thinner than either should be, moving through deep snow with unnatural speed. One moment it was far off, almost blending into the trunks. The next, it felt close enough to hear. And the emotional terror of the Wendigo is bigger than the creature itself. It represents what winter can do to the mind. The isolation, the starvation, the slow collapse of morality when survival becomes the only thing left. That is why the Wendigo is remembered. Not because it is just a monster, but because it is a warning about what people can become when hunger stops being physical and turns spiritual. A bear is terrifying because it is powerful. A wolf is terrifying because it hunts. The Wendigo is terrifying because it knows what it means to be human and lost that part anyway. So if you ever find yourself in a frozen forest and you notice tracks that look almost human, only larger, much larger, stop following them. Because if the Wendigo leaves footprints, it may not be wandering. It may be leading you somewhere. And maybe that's why stories like these never die. Because Mothman is not just about a thing with red eyes in the sky. It is about the feeling that disaster can arrive before we understand it. The Skinwalker is not just about something wearing the wrong face. It is about the fear that evil can learn to sound familiar. The Wendigo is not just about a creature in the snow. It is about what happens when hunger, greed, and despair strip away everything human and leave only need. That is what makes these legends last. Not the claws, not the wings, not the teeth. The fact that each one reflects something people already know somewhere deep down is real. That warnings can be missed, that trust can be betrayed, that a person can become something unrecognizable long before the body does. And maybe that's why we keep telling these stories in the dark. Because the oldest monsters are never just monsters. They are echoes of grief, of fear, of guilt, of the part of the world that has always felt slightly wrong once the sun goes down. So if you ever hear something outside the window, or see a shape standing where no shape should be, or feel that sudden animal certainty that you are no longer alone, maybe do not ask which legend it belongs to. Because in the end, the scariest possibility is not that all of these stories are different. It is that they all are warning you about the same thing. That something has always been out there, waiting in the places where people are isolated, desperate, and afraid. And sometimes, it does not come to hunt you. Sometimes, it waits for you to become it.